Hello and welcome to another in my introduction to business videos, and in this lesson we'll be looking at ethics and social responsibility. Now the material that I'm covering here on ethics and social responsibility is here to kind of underscore the importance of business's role in our society. Throughout this video I'm going to define the term business ethics and to discuss different major factors believed to influence the level of ethical behavior within an organization. We're also going to examine several types of ethical issues and provide some examples. Now, in today's organizations, most managers are finding ways of balancing a growing agenda of socially responsible activities along with that drive to generate those necessary profits for the organization. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the term ethics is as a foundation for defining business ethics. Now, ethics is the study of right and wrong and of the morality of choices that individuals make. Plagiarism involves taking someone else's work, their ideas, or other original material without acknowledging of that source. And that's an example of having bad ethics or making an immoral choice, and an individual can choose to do that. Now, business ethics, this here is where we build on this. This is the application of moral standards to our business situations. How do you decide what is right and what is wrong? Is there some type of internal mechanism or process that you use or some type of code that you follow? And think about, where did you learn your personal code from in life? Now, under what conditions should people be kept artificially alive? That's an example of an ethical dilemma. Some of these type things can be answered by moral reflection that's related to what it means to, in this case, be a person, or who should have the responsibility for someone else's life. These decisions can also be influenced by such things as religious beliefs. But if we look at those religious beliefs, that's a kind of a question, a religious question, not an ethical question. There are lots of other cases, like if your brother or sister is very ill and they need medication that you can't afford, should you steal it? And then you come across the question, well, is it ever right to steal, even if you are the one that has that greater need? So throughout life, you will come across several different ethical decisions and ethical dilemmas. Let's talk about how it is involved with business. Business people face ethical issues every day, and some of these issues can be difficult to assess. These issues arise out of a business's relationship with their investors, their customers, their employees, their creditors, and even their competitors. Each of these stakeholder groups has specific concerns and usually exerts pressure on the managers within an organization. Now, according to some research published a few years ago, the three major areas of public concern are looking at corporate tax avoidance, executives' pay, and employees being able to speak out about a company's wrongdoing. Bribery and corruption and discrimination also cause the public concern when it comes to ethical issues we see in business. We'll start with fairness and honesty here as some of our ethical concerns. Fairness and honesty in business are very important ethical concerns. Business people must obey all laws and regulations, as well as refrain from knowingly deceiving, misrepresenting, or intimidating others. Another one we want to look at is with organizational relationships. It may be tempting to place personal welfare above the welfare of others or of the organization. Relationships with customers and coworkers often create ethical problems. As an example, is taking credit for others' ideas or works, or not meeting that person's commitments to the organization, or maybe pressuring others to behave unethically. Another area of concern is that of conflict of interest. Now, this conflict of interest results when a business person takes advantage of a situation for their own personal interest rather than for the employer's interest. And then lastly, we'll talk about communications. Business communications, especially in advertising, can present ethical questions. Advertisers must take precautions to guard against deception. They're not always successful. Let's take a look at a couple examples here. I said that they should take precautions to guard against deception. Well, let's look at this example where ethics were definitely neglected. PETA had a very insensitive ad that they labeled "Save the Whales." This is from the animal rights group PETA, and these were printed on a bunch of billboards in Florida. Obviously, this did not take any type of ethics into account for how it would affect people. Another example here is with Mr. Clean. This was a Mother's Day ad, and you can see there's a strong implication that the real work of a woman is clean the house, and this is just not acceptable. This was very unethical for them to have this ad. Another example here is with Reebok in this ad, the cheat on your girlfriend ad. Many consumers rightfully complained about this terrible message that Reebok was sending out to people. Now, there are 3 factors that affect the level of ethical behavior in organizations. They are individual, social, and opportunity. With individual factors affecting ethics, individual knowledge of an issue. Now, a decision maker with a greater amount of knowledge regarding a situation may take steps to avoid ethical problems, whereas a less informed person may take action unknowingly that leads to an ethical quagmire. Or you can think of this as an awkward or complex or even a hazardous situation. Personal values is another area here, and an individual's moral values and central value-related attitudes also clearly influence their person's behavior. And with personal goals, these types of personal goals an individual aspires to and the manner in which these goals are pursued have a great impact on that individual's behavior within that organization. These are those 3 factors of individual. So, individual knowledge, personal values, and personal goals. And we also have social factors that affect ethics. And I've got a few here that I want to talk about. The first one I want to talk about is cultural norms as a social factor affecting ethics. A person's behavior in an organization's workplace to some degree is determined by their cultural norms, and these social factors can vary from one culture to another. So you must be cognizant of that. Another one of those social factors is their coworkers. The actions and decisions of coworkers constitute another social factor believed to shape a person's sense of business ethics. The third one I wanted to bring up is significant others. The moral values and attitudes of significant others, such as spouses, friends, relatives, can also affect an employee's perception of what is ethical and unethical behavior in their workplace. And then, of course, the use of the internet. Even the internet presents new challenges for organizations whose employees enjoy easy access to sites through convenient high-speed connections at their work. An employee's behavior online can be viewed as offensive to coworkers and possibly lead to lawsuits against an organization if employees engage in unethical behavior on controversial websites that are not related to their job or their job duties. And you can think of a classroom could also be considered a workplace for the time that students are there working or learning. And you can think about maybe some examples of ethical behavior that could exist in a classroom, and some controversial or on the other side, some examples of unethical behavior that could happen in a classroom. Beyond the obvious cheating issues, you can probably come up with some things, such as maybe as an example of a student monopolizing the instructor's time away from everybody else. Now, the third one I wanted to talk about is opportunity as a factor for obviously affecting ethics. There are three things here I wanted to talk about. The presence of an opportunity. Now, opportunity refers to the amount of freedom an organization gives their employees to behave unethically if they make that choice. There's also ethic codes or ethical codes. This is the existence in an organization for an ethical code and the importance that management places on that ethical code can be some other determinants of opportunity. And then enforcement. This is that degree of enforcement of company policies, the company procedures, and those ethical codes can be a major force affecting opportunity. Most authorities agree that there is room for improvement in business ethics. A more problematic issue is where businesses can be made more ethical out in the real world. Now, there's a government role in encouraging ethics. The government can establish acceptable levels of behavior by passing more stringent regulations. The easiest example I can give you is, and I hope you'll go out and look this up, is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. And we generally refer to this as SOX, but if you look up Sarbanes-Oxley Act, this gives those who report corporate misconduct sweeping new legal protection. There is a lot that you will find out when you look into SOX, and if a company participates in SOX, which hopefully they do, you will be audited for different things. And essentially what impact this has to you and your organization is that you clearly outline what you're going to do about certain things and that you are going to do what you say you're going to do. I've been through several SOX audits. Other countries have these too, like there's the Japanese Sarbanes-Oxley Act or JSOX, and it can be very detailed when it comes to your audits, but you want to be able to make sure that you collect evidence throughout the year to be able to validate that you're doing exactly what you say you're doing. Trade associations can, and they often do, provide ethical guidelines for their members to follow. And then lastly, we're looking at individual companies' role in encouraging ethics. Now, a code of ethics is perhaps the most effective way to encourage ethical behavior in an organization. A code of ethics is a guide to acceptable and ethical behavior as defined by your organization. Today, about 95% of the Fortune 1000 firms have a formal code of ethics or conduct. In the wake of a number of corporate scandals and the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that I mentioned, many large companies now have created a new executive position called the Chief Ethics, or you might even hear them called the Chief Compliance Officer. Now, obviously, we can have a set of codes, but we can't possibly cover every situation. But having our code of ethics is better than having nothing. And it's something that your members of your organization should be made familiar with and sign and agree to. Now, whistleblowing is a term that really came about with the Sarbanes-Oxley misconduct that I was talking about earlier. Unethical practices often become ingrained in our organization, and that's not really acceptable. Employees with high personal ethics may take a controversial step known as whistleblowing. What this whistleblowing is informing the press or government officials about unethical practices within an organization. As I mentioned, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 protects whistleblowers who report corporate misconduct. Now, federal employees who report misconduct are protected by the Whistleblower Act of 1989. So just some key acts to know about, and you can go out and do some research for these to know a little bit more about what they entail. Now, let's talk now about some guidelines for making ethical decisions. And I want to show you a chart here, and I want you to think of this as your ethical troubleshooting process whenever you're making decisions. Now, the first one here is listen and learn. Recognize the problems or decision-making opportunity that confronts your organization, your team, or your group. Don't argue, criticize, or defend yourself. Keep listening and reviewing until you are sure that you understand each person. Next, identify the ethical issues. Explain how coworkers and consumers are affected by this situation or the decision that's at hand. Examine how you feel about this situation and attempt to understand the viewpoint of those involved in the decision or in the consequences of that decision. Next, we need to create and analyze our options. Try to put aside strong feelings such as anger or desire for power and prestige and come up with as many alternatives as possible before developing an analysis. Ask everyone involved for their ideas about which options offer the best long-term results for both you and the organization. Then decide which option will increase your self-respect, even if in the long run things don't work out the way you hope they will. Then we need to identify the best option from your point of view. Consider it and test it against some established criteria such as respect, understanding, caring, fairness, honesty, and, openness. Then lastly, explain your decision and resolve any differences that arise. Now, this may require neutral arbitration from someone such as a trusted manager or taking time out from the situation to reconsider, maybe even consult or exchange written proposals before the final decision is reached. So I hope you will find this ethical guideline a great starting tool to use, and hopefully it just becomes natural. It may seem like common sense, but you will find out when you're in some dilemmas in an organization that all of these steps aren't always followed. Now, social responsibility. As we move on, I want to talk how this is the recognition that business activities have an impact on society and the consideration of that impact in business decision making. Social responsibility can cost companies, a considerable amount of money, but it is also just a matter of good business. Now, examples of responsible organizations that I thought I would present here are, I'll give you an example with Target. Target as a corporation has donated $1 billion for public education. Target's support has provided books, different school supplies, even food for students, field trips, as well as other benefits to students and schools throughout the U.S. and around the world. Now, another company I thought I'd bring up is Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble's orange loads of Hope trucks take disaster victims' dirty laundry, they wash it, and then return it to them clean and folded. This program has done more than 55,000 loads of laundry for people. Even small businesses can develop social responsibility programs. When they do this, this creates a whole nother term that you should be familiar with, and that's corporate citizenship. This is adopting a strategic approach to fulfilling economic, ethical, environmental, and social responsibilities. Hopefully, there is something in place in your organization or the organization that you will become part of in the future that promotes corporate citizenship. Social responsibility is not just a term, it is something that we should strive for so that we realize the impacts our organizations can have on our society and our communities. Now, there are two models of social responsibility that I want to discuss, and those two, we'll start with the economic model. The economic model of social responsibility holds that society will benefit most when business is just left alone to produce and market profitable products that society needs. Well, then there is the socioeconomic model. The socioeconomic model of social responsibility holds that businesses should emphasize not only profits, but also the impact of its decisions on society. Well, let's look at the pros and cons of social responsibility. The merits of the economic and socioeconomic models have been debated for years, and each side seems to have four different arguments. On the pro side, the first one we look at is that because business is a part of our society, it should not and cannot ignore the social issues that exist. Another pro for this is that business has the technical, financial, and managerial resources that are needed to tackle those complex social issues, and they should. Another pro is that by helping resolve the social issues, businesses can create a more stable environment for that long-term profitability by doing the right thing. And then social responsibility decision making by firms can prevent increased government intervention, which would force businesses to do what they fail to do voluntarily. So they want to keep governmental intervention out. Now, a con to or an against thought for social responsibility is that business managers are responsible primarily to their stockholders. So management must be concerned with providing a return on their owners' investments, not spending money on programs and doing the right thing, because that's going to take away money from the bottom line. And then corporate time, money, and talent should be used to maximize the profits of that business and what service and products they're providing, not to worrying about society's problems. Another con is that social problems affect society in general, so individual businesses should not be expected to solve their problems. And lastly, the last con I will talk about is social issues are the responsibility of government officials who are elected for that purpose and who are accountable to their voters for those decisions. So these are just, they've been debated for years, and this is what seemed to come out of looking at social responsibility on both sides. Now I wanted to talk about consumerism and introduce that term because consumerism consists of all of our activities that are undertaken to protect the rights of consumers. The consumer movement issues fall into three different categories: environmental protection, product performance and safety, of course, and then information disclosure. So when we talk about consumerism and the consumer movement, there's three categories that we look at, and that's environmental protection, product performance, and information disclosure. Now, when we talk about this, we need to talk about what rights we have as consumers. And we've got several rights that we should understand and expect. The first one is the right to safety. The right to safety specifies that products purchased by consumers must be safe for their intended use, include thorough and explicit directions for proper use, and be tested by the manufacturer to ensure product quality and that product's reliability. And then we have the right to be informed. And this right means that consumers must have access to complete information about a product before they buy it. In addition, manufacturers must inform its consumers about the potential dangers of using their products. And the next time you're looking at a product you've bought, take a look, let's just say as a household item or something for your garage, your vehicle, and you will see that this information is there. We have the right to choose. Now, the right to choose, this just means that we as consumers have a choice of the products offered by different manufacturers and sellers to satisfy that particular need that we have and why we want to buy it. Then we have the right to be heard. And this right to be heard just means that someone will listen and take appropriate action when customers complain. In 1975, president at the time, President Ford, added the right to consumer education. And this just entitles people to be fully informed about their rights as consumers. And then in 1994, President Clinton added the right to service. And this right to service entitles us as consumers to convenience, courtesy, and responsiveness from manufacturers and suppliers. Now, there are lots of major federal legislation protecting us as consumers that exist, and you can do research on some of these, but you can go way back to 1960s to start seeing these major legislations. And I've got a few listed here. There's also an example from 1966 is the Motor Vehicle Safety Act. This established standards for making sure that we have safer cars. In 1968, there was the Truth in Lending Act. This required lenders and credit merchants to disclose the full cost of those finance charges in both dollars as well as annual percentages. And you can see here we have some others, and you can read these. And a more recent one, relatively recent, was the Do Not Call Implementation Act. And this was established back in 2003. This act directed the FCC and the FTC to coordinate so that their rules are consistent regarding telemarketing call practices, including the Do Not Call registry and other lists, as well as abandonment. Let's look at public health here. Many people believe that organizations have a basic responsibility to contribute to the general well-being of the public, starting with ensuring that their products do not harm anyone. Beyond this basic responsibility, however, there is contention with regard to how far business responsibility to public health extends, especially with issues such as obesity, smoking, heart disease, smartphone use while driving, alcohol use, and in recent years, the marketing of e-cigarettes, and as this has elicited much controversy. There are other issues businesses face with regards to public health, including labeling products that contain genetically modified organisms, or making questionable claims of the health benefits of supplements and ingredients, or where and how to provide affordable housing for the homeless, as well as many other issues in regards to public health. Another area we should look at when it comes to ethics and social responsibility is employment practices. Everyone who works for a living should have the opportunity to land a job for which they are qualified, and then to be rewarded on the basis of ability and individual performance. Now, although this is an important issue for society, over the years, this opportunity has been denied to members of various minority groups. A minority is defined as a racial, religious, political, national, or other group regarded as different from the larger group of which it is a part of, and that is often singled out for unfavorable treatment. More than 50 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, abuse still exists. Responsible managers have instituted several programs to counteract the results of discrimination. An affirmative action program is a plan in which designed to increase the number of minority employees at all levels within the organization. Another one that we want to talk about here is with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is a government agency with the power to investigate complaints of employment discrimination and sue firms that practice it. The threat of legal action has persuaded some and most corporations to amend their hiring and their promotional practices. Now, we should also talk about training programs for the hardcore unemployed. Some firms have assumed the task of helping the hardcore unemployed. These are those workers with little education or vocational training and can have a long history of unemployment. Such workers require training, and this training can be expensive and time-consuming, but it's the right thing to do. An example of where we've seen this at is with the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. And the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino teamed up with a technical college in Kenosha, Wisconsin, to create a job training institute to recruit and train Native Americans for casino and related jobs in that Kenosha area. So they recognized in that area that they had some hardcore unemployed. They created a plan and implemented it to try to give some of those hardcore unemployed jobs and get them ready for that. And hopefully you can find examples of that in your areas. Or if you get to the point where you can make those decisions in an organization, hopefully you will give that some thought. Now, I want to talk about sexual harassment and abusive behavior. Now, to create a workplace environment that stifles any type of bullying, sexual harassment, and other abusive conduct, managers need to provide programs to foster more ethical conduct in their workplaces and create formal policies like a sexual harassment policy or a bullying or abusive behavior policy. And the creation of these should define and prohibit unacceptable abusive conduct. This is essential in every organization to make sure that they are creating these policies and then training their employees in these policies so that we can avoid such harmful workplace environments that are affected by bullying, sexual harassment, and any other type of abusive behavior. On to talking about environmental concerns here. Now, the waste produced by a business and society is a major environmental issue. Another environmental issue is that of pollution. And pollution is just the contamination of our water, our air, or land through the actions of people in an industrialized society. Pollution is considered as the contamination of this through our acts. We make the decisions on how we are producing things, how we are creating things, and how we properly dispose of those things. We don't want to affect our communities with our decisions, with how we're producing our goods and services. One major pollution issue that reoccurs more than we like is with oil spills. Oil spills have long-lasting effects on wildlife and other natural resources, and that's just one example I want to share. As always, I want you to go out and look up some of these environmental concern issues that have occurred in our society from different organizations, and look at your communities to see how those things have either affected or what actions have taken place to prevent some of these issues. Current environmental legislation involves laws to promote clean air, clean water, and even quiet work and living environments. Of major importance was the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. This is that federal agency that's charged with enforcing laws designed to protect our environment. So this is another area that you can look up to find out more about the EPA and what they're doing. Let's talk about the business response to environmental concerns. One of the most effective ways that companies can reduce their impact on the environment is to reduce waste from their operations and other activities that they employ. Companies can reduce their impact on the environment by such things as identifying and eliminating their inefficiencies in their production and operations. They can also find alternative uses for their waste. Striving to recycle as much as possible is another thing that organizations can do to reduce the impact on their environment. They can convert their used materials into new products or components for new products in order to prevent that unnecessary disposal when it could have been used to create something else. Another thing that organizations can do is they can use greener forms of power to counter their use of the huge quantities of energy during their operations and activities. If they're looking at these greener forms of power, then they can either replace or offset that traditional power that's being used that has given us great environmental concerns. Now, I just want to go over the steps of implementing a program of social responsibility. And it's going to require really just 4 things. You need a commitment from the top executives. Without securing the commitment from the top executives, any program will falter and become ineffective. Another step is in the planning. Here we need a committee of managers, and they should be appointed to plan the program. And then there should be an appointment of a director. A top-level executive should be appointed here to implement the organization's plan, that we were getting buy-in and we're getting effective use and support as needed for these social responsibility plans. And lastly, there needs to be a social audit. And a social audit is a comprehensive report of what an organization has done and is doing in regards to social issues that affect it. Now, that is all that I've video. I appreciate you following along, and I hope that while this video is very general in some of the areas, that it motivates you and inspires you to want to go out and look up more information from these general topics that you will face and come across in an organization. Hopefully you will be part of some of these issues and how your organization responds to these issues, so that you take a personal investment in it and employ the things we talk about to make sure that your organization is performing ethically and is making sure that it understands its social responsibility to its community. Thank you for following along, and good luck as you continue through this series and in your understanding of business as a whole. Thank you, everyone.